Then we have a number of conditions of aging. Changes in the musculoskeletal system and the cardiovascular system. So musculoskeletal, we have a lot of information about this, but between 30 and 40, your body mass tends to go up. It peaks around 50 to 59. Again, thank goodness it's peaking. And flexibility declines. And so you're carrying around more weight and you're less flexible. There's also a number of diagnosable conditions, including osteoporosis, which many people have heard of. It is the most common type of bone disease, and it's the leading cause of this is a drop in estrogen for women, which happens during menopause, and testosterone for men, and happens around 50 for women, 70 for men, and it is a leaching of the calcium from the bones, making them more prone to fracture. There's also osteopenia, which is a less severe form of osteoporosis and could develop into osteoporosis. Arthritis, and which is a condition where there's inflammation of the joints and a wearing away of the cartilage so that the joints are actually rubbing on each other rather than rubbing on the more cushioning surface of the cartilage. This can cause stiffness, pain, and loss of movement. The cartilage becomes more brittle and unable to repair itself as we age, and it becomes less hydrated, which also causes it to degrade. And then there's osteoarthritis. This is a particular version of arthritis that is age-related, and it tends to happen in the knees, hips, spine, and hands. So all of those joints that you typically see middle-aged and older people finding very stiff and painful. All right, read about the details in the presenter notes, and I'm going to go on to the cardiovascular system. So aerobic capacity is greatly affected by age and also disease processes. And aerobic activity is the capacity of a person to perform physiological work measured by energy consumption, and it's the best indicator of cardiovascular fitness. So we know that brisk walking, running, jumping jacks, dancing, all of those sorts of things that get our activities that get our heart rate up are aerobic activities, and the system declines as we age. All right, let's talk about a little of the good news, or potentially good news. So flexibility is decreasing. This continues on through late adulthood, and after about 50, there's a big drop in both genders. Now, flexibility, like other physiological functions, decreases if you don't work on it. And so what I found is that I need to stretch pretty much every day. And if I don't, I find myself getting stiffer much faster. And so engaging in yoga practice, or Pilates, or things where flexibility is really inherent in the activity can be very important. And flexibility can be maintained well into late adulthood if it is an area of focus. Strength also decreases as we age, and strength training is a good way to maintain. I find, and using me as an example is not necessarily typical, but just as I said with early adulthood, use yourself as a self-reference. Kind of use myself as a self-reference because I'm going through it. So what I find again is that if I don't use it, I lose it, and I lose it a lot faster. So strength training helps, and it can actually slow down some of the natural deterioration seen in aging muscles. And that's what it's about, been using my muscles for almost 60 years, and they're just not they're not able to sustain the same level of health and robustness that they used to be. Also, cardiovascular fitness. So engaging in aerobic activity is super important. It's a protective measure against changes in body mass and also sarcopenia and osteoporosis. Cardio fitness is good for everybody, but interestingly, it's more beneficial to men than to women. All right, so, there's a lot of changes and a lot of decline that happens, yet the good news is that with some attention and work, we can sustain flexibility, strength, cardio fitness, etc. Let's now look at some of the health risks in middle adulthood. So again, if you'll recall, we started off with not really so many health risks in our kids and our, in early childhood and in our middle childhood and even into adolescence. And early adulthood, we start to have some stress issues, still motor vehicle accidents, pushing yourself too far, things like that. But with all of this age-related decline, we start having a number of very commonly seen issues. The first is hypertension, also known as high blood pressure. It's associated with stroke and heart disease, and it can lead to kidney disease. There's a number of risk factors that are associated with hypertension, so please read about that. Next up is cardiovascular disease, and that is any condition of the heart or the blood vessels. The most common is arteriosclerosis, and that is plaque building up in the walls of the arteries. So we talked about high cholesterol being a risk factor. High cholesterol contributes to buildup of plaque in the walls of arteries. And there's many other cardiovascular diseases, including coronary artery disease, heart attack, abnormal rhythms of the heart, congestive heart failure, heart valve disease, and vascular disease. So a lot of stuff starts changing with our cardiovascular system. Diabetes mellitus is a metabolic disorder, and we do hear about it in kids. It's type 1 diabetes typically. Type 2 diabetes is an adult onset form of diabetes, and it's greatly impacted by lifestyle factors and obesity. So it's most common in African Americans, Native Hawaiians, Asian Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, and Pacific Islanders. And so when we're working with folks from those ethnic groups, we want to have our radar up to be conscious and sensitive to the issues surrounding diabetes. And finally, cancer. So cancer is basically an uncontrolled growth of cells in the body, and they're abnormal cells. And the likelihood of developing cancer increases with age. Between 40 and 64, so our middle adulthood years, 4% of men and 6% of women are diagnosed with some form of cancer. Whew. All right, so activities and participation. And at this point, and sorry I did not say this earlier, you'll see these slides that have a woman on it and a red background with some little cute shapes on it. And when you're studying, you can see that you can kind of flip through your slide deck and see that each of these slides marks the transition between different sections of the lecture. So if you want to find something quickly, look for these slides. All right, so activities and participation include all aspects of occupation, and any decline, like significant decline in function, would be non-normative pattern for middle adults. So we're still out there, we're still participating. We have very broad and diverse activities and participation, and we have a couple of things that kind of come to the fore in middle adulthood. One of them is our roles. So, middle adulthood, we have a lot of different roles or different hats that we wear. They're in part culturally determined, also education, socioeconomic status, family composition. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but there's many roles that middle adults need to participate in and fulfill. This can lead to something called role strain, which is kind of an overload or a feeling of anxiety, stress, and tension when there's conflict in the demands of the roles, or when individuals don't agree with the assessment of others concerning their performance in their role, or from accepting roles that are beyond one's capacity. So role strain happens for a variety of reasons. Could just be that there's too much going on, could be the performance, could be a clash between the roles, could be that capacity and demands are not well matched. It's an imbalance, an occupational imbalance, and we want to watch out for that. Again, it's the sandwich generation. So in addition to having a full plate with wearing all of these different hats, being a caregiver in some cases for generations on both sides of middle adulthood can really be a huge source of role strain. So let's talk about stress and psychological demands. And I've talked about some of that with role strain. So self-efficacy is the belief that you can succeed in a specific area. It has connections to locus of control, and there's two different types of locus of control. One is an internal locus, which means that the individual believes that they have control over what happens in life. It's associated with positive health and feeling less stress. And it's not the same as like being a control freak, like I can control everything, but just that one can help mediate change when things are not going well, right? Let's contrast that with an external locus of control. And that is the belief that what happens to an individual is outside of their control and that external variables are to blame for what happens. This external locus of control is associated with greater levels of stress and anxiety, and adults become more external as they enter middle adulthood. It results in reduced levels of effort, persistence, and strategy use. So if you're like, well, there's nothing I can do about it, why try, right? It's sort of that perspective. And it also leads to less frequent engagement in memory tasks and physical activities. And we know, right, from earlier in this lecture and also just in general, that you really got to use it so that you don't lose it. So it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. A positive sense of accomplishment can protect an individual from developing more of an external locus of control. And certainly, with COVID and the pandemic, many of us have been struggling with this idea of an external locus of control because we really are out of control over a very big thing that's happening in life. So we're in an interesting period in that way, and coping has happened different ways for different people depending on how they can reframe what's happening, and can individuals get a sense of control or management over perhaps much smaller things or much more day-to-day mundane things, but it contributes to bringing back some kind of balance and homeostasis. All right, so let's talk about stress. There's also a number of different kinds of stress reactions that happen to middle adults. And stress, again, is, the internal sense that one's resources to cope with demands, whatever they are, will be depleted. So common stress reactions are mental exhaustion, memory problems, and sleep disturbances. And again, if we look at our recent huge stressful event of COVID and the pandemic, we can see that that's affecting folks of all ages, but it definitely affects middle adults. And not to say it's limited to a pandemic, but we're looking at individuals who have a lot on their plate and a lot of balls in the air, to put two metaphors together, or analogies. And so stressors definitely will take a toll on the individual. Acute stressors from early adulthood, interestingly, decrease, and this is because middle adults avoid stress and/or stress becomes more predictable. So that's the good news. The stress that is experienced tends to be chronic, however. I'm going to let you look at chronic stressors and stress hardiness, which is kind of the resilience and ability to manage stress. That's in the presenter notes. And I'm going to go on to coping mechanisms, which are the ways in which we find strategies to help us manage our stress, not success. Cognitive appraisal is one of those, and that is one's emotional reaction and the extent of stress perception. Adaptive coping is an approach to problem solving that helps one to master a situation or get more resources to deal with a stressful situation. And palliative coping is an emotionally focused form of coping where the main objective is simply to feel better and manage the stress while the stress is going on, and you can't necessarily get out of it. So things like breathing, journaling, and less adaptive kinds of coping like drinking, smoking, and substance use. So finding positive coping mechanisms is particularly important in middle adulthood because we have this effect on health and relationships, which contribute to quality of life for middle adults. So a complicated set of factors that either result in the person having better coping mechanisms or succumbing to possibly an enormous amount of stress.